There are secrets that governments bury in classified vaults, sealed away from public eyes for generations. And then there are secrets of a far more personal kind, the ones carried silently inside a single human heart, guarded not by iron doors or legal oaths, but by loyalty, grief, and a quiet understanding that some truths are simply too heavy to speak aloud. For more than 5 decades, Clint Hill carried exactly that kind of secret. Not a political conspiracy, not a state secret, but something in many ways more profound, an intimate knowledge of the real Jacqueline Kennedy, the woman who existed behind the pearls, the pillbox hats, and the composed, luminous smile that the entire world thought it understood. When Hill finally chose to speak, the picture he painted was nothing like the icon history had preserved in amber. It was something far more human, far more heartbreaking, and ultimately far more remarkable. This is the story of what he saw, what he kept silent about for half a century, and why the truth about Jackie Kennedy is both more painful and more extraordinary than any myth ever captured. In the autumn of 1960, the United States was on the cusp of a generational transformation. John F. Kennedy, young, charismatic, and electric with possibility, had just won one of the most closely contested presidential elections in American history. The country was electrified. Washington prepared itself for an entirely new kind of administration, one that would bring youth, intellect, and a certain theatrical glamour to the highest office in the land. Inside the United States Secret Service, assignments were being reshuffled to accommodate the incoming first family. Clint Hill, a young agent stationed in Denver, received his new orders without fanfare. He was being transferred to Washington and assigned to protect Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, the president-elect's wife. On paper, it seemed a straightforward posting. In practice, it would become the assignment that defined his entire existence. Hill's initial reaction, by his own candid admission in later interviews and written memoirs, was something close to disappointment. The Secret Service's Presidential Protective Division was widely regarded as the pinnacle of the agency's work. Guarding the First Lady, however accomplished and admired, felt to many younger agents like a secondary role. Important in its own right, certainly, but not quite the center of history. Hill was ambitious. He had imagined something different for his career. That assumption dissolved within weeks of beginning his new assignment. Jacqueline Kennedy was not, it turned out, the kind of woman who required simply a uniformed presence at her elbow during ribbon-cutting ceremonies and state dinners. She was restless, intellectually voracious, deeply independent, and utterly unwilling to allow her identity to be swallowed by the ceremonial demands of her position. She rode horses with genuine passion and skill, not for the cameras, but because it brought her genuine joy. She traveled with intention and curiosity. She moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had been intellectually serious long before political life had handed her a public stage. For Hill, keeping pace with her required something more than physical vigilance. It required genuine attention to her rhythms, her preferences, her unspoken needs, and the complex emotional landscape of a woman navigating one of the most scrutinized roles on the planet. Slowly, almost without his noticing, what had felt like a professional demotion revealed itself as something far more demanding and far more meaningful than anything he had previously imagined. The image of Jacqueline Kennedy that the American public consumed in the early 1960s was carefully curated, partly by design and partly by the natural alchemy of fame. She was elegance made flesh. Her taste in fashion, art, and interior design set global trends almost effortlessly. Her composure at official functions was legendary. Foreign dignitaries were captivated by her. Charles de Gaulle, a man not easily impressed by anyone, was visibly charmed. The Indian public, when she visited in 1962, greeted her with a warmth that bordered on adoration. But Clint Hill saw what happened when the cameras were switched off and the motorcades dispersed. Away from public view, Jackie Kennedy was funny. Genuinely, sharply, unexpectedly funny, with a dry, intelligent wit that she often deployed at her own expense. She could deliver a perfectly timed observation about the absurdity of her celebrity with a deadpan expression that made the people around her dissolve into laughter. She mocked the rigid formality that surrounded White House life with a gentle irreverence that those closest to her found disarming and utterly refreshing. She was also, Hill came to understand, a deeply serious intellectual. Her interest in art, architecture, literature, and history was not the performative interest of someone seeking cultural credibility. It was genuine, rooted in years of serious reading and study, nurtured by European education and a mind that found genuine pleasure in ideas. She could move seamlessly from discussing the architectural legacy of ancient Greece to the particular merits of a certain French novelist, and she did so not to impress anyone, but simply because these things mattered to her. During quieter periods, long drives through the Virginia countryside, private retreats in Palm Beach, evenings when the schedule permitted something approaching normalcy, Hill witnessed a woman who was at once more vulnerable and more resilient than the public image suggested. She spoke about her children with a fierceness that made clear they were her primary anchor in an often disorienting world. She worried about their exposure to public life in ways that any thoughtful parent would recognize. She wanted them to have a childhood that felt real, not choreographed. She also carried, Hill observed, a kind of loneliness that fame makes almost inevitable. When you become a symbol, people stop seeing the actual human being. They see the idea of you. They respond to the image rather than the person. Jackie Kennedy inhabited that peculiar isolation with dignity, but it was a real burden, and Hill, seeing her daily in unguarded moments, understood its weight in ways that most people around her could not. She sought beauty deliberately and urgently. This was not vanity. Hill came to understand it as something closer to necessity. For Jackie, surrounding herself with beautiful things, well-designed spaces, meaningful art, music, the particular quality of light on water during an evening ride, was a form of emotional sustenance. It was how she maintained her equilibrium against pressures that would have crushed most people entirely. The summer of 1963 brought with it a private catastrophe that the American public largely processed from a respectful distance, understanding its outlines, but not its depths. Jacqueline Kennedy was pregnant with her third child. She had largely retreated from public life during the pregnancy, seeking the rest and privacy that her doctors advised and that she genuinely needed. On August 7th, 1963, complications arose with devastating speed. She was rushed to Otis Air Force Base Hospital in Massachusetts, where she delivered a son nearly 6 weeks premature. Clint Hill, though officially off duty when the call came, did not hesitate. He went directly to the hospital. This decision, made without calculation or obligation, speaks to something essential about the nature of the bond that had developed between agent and protectee over the previous 3 years. This was no longer simply a professional relationship governed by duty rosters and protective protocols. Hill felt responsible for this family in a way that went beyond any written job description. The baby, named Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, was desperately ill from the moment of his birth. He was suffering from hyaline membrane disease, a condition affecting the lungs of premature infants that, in 1963, medicine had limited ability to treat. The technology and pharmaceutical interventions that would eventually make this condition survivable, in most cases, simply did not exist yet. Patrick's lungs could not sustain him in the world he had arrived in too early. Hill watched from outside the delivery room, then paced the corridors of the hospital as the infant was transferred to Boston Children's Hospital, where specialists attempted experimental treatments that represented the outer limits of what medical science could offer. Through all of it, he remained close, available, and quietly devastated. He arranged for a Catholic priest to come to the hospital to baptize Patrick, an act that Hill undertook not because anyone asked him to, but because he understood without being told that it would matter enormously to the Kennedy family. It was the kind of gesture that cannot be written into a protection manual. It came from genuine human attentiveness. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy died on August 9th, 1963, having lived for just 39 hours. The grief that descended on Jacqueline Kennedy in the aftermath was, by Hill's account, among the most profound things he ever witnessed. She did not collapse. She did not allow herself a public breakdown. But the loss was written in her with an unmistakable permanence. This was not her first encounter with devastating personal loss, and the accumulation of griefs, private, largely unacknowledged by a public that saw only the gilded surface of her life, had given her a quality of sorrow that existed at some depth below her daily composure. What Hill observed in those days was a woman who understood that grief does not pause for public responsibility, but who had made an iron internal commitment to carry it privately. For Hill, watching this unfold, the effect was permanent. He had spent nearly 3 years learning who Jackie Kennedy really was. In those terrible August days, he understood her in a way that no photograph, no news report, and no public appearance had ever communicated. 3 months later, the world would add to that grief in a manner so catastrophic that it would permanently alter the course of American history and the life of every person present in Dallas on November 22, 1963. The day began with cautious optimism. The presidential trip to Texas had been conceived partly as a political mission, an effort to smooth tensions within the Texas Democratic Party ahead of the 1964 election, and partly as an opportunity to bring Jackie Kennedy back to the public stage after months of personal difficulty following the loss of Patrick. Dallas was not considered a particularly